A very warm welcome to CNN Talk. You're just joining us on Facebook. The show will start in about 5 or 6 minutes or so on CNN. Today, we want to talk about the China-US trade war, trade deal. We know that at midnight on Friday, the US imposed higher tariffs, in fact, on $200 billion or so of Chinese goods. That went from 10% to 25%. So we want to know from you, who are the winners? Who are the losers in this? Does China have the most to lose? Does the United States? Let's throw it out. Liam, what do you think?
I think both sides have got a lot to lose.
Yeah.
And that's why I think there will be a deal done. I personally think, be really interested in what my US colleagues think. I personally think this is the last sort of display of machismo and teeth gnarling before a deal is done. As each,
part of the strategy.
As each side tries to cement its concessions. Look, the Chinese are in Washington. They weren't going to turn up. They're close to doing a deal. Chinese growth is slowing, so President Xi needs a deal. Trump knows the election is now on the horizon. He knows that while steel workers like these tariffs, those workers who work in factories that use steel, which are many, many more people, I'll talk about the numbers when we start, are suffering from these tariffs.
Absolutely.
Their firms are becoming less competitive. So in the end, I do think we'll get a deal. And I think Trump has been brash and crude in his tactics, but I think he's going to be proved right.
Perhaps, but Greg, but we know that we've got 2020 elections coming up. That plays well to his base. But actually, many within in the Midwest will say this will impact, this will trickle down to us.
Right. I think there's a lot more for China to lose than the U.S., but you still need a strong economy going into the election. That's how Trump's going to win. He is playing with the House's money, though. He's got a absolutely fantastic economic growth.
Yeah.
It's, you know, the deregulation and the tax reform worked. So he's taking a bit of a risk. There is a possibility that there is some slowdown or some reduction in GDP growth because of the tariffs, but that's a risk he's willing to take. He is brash, he is, you know, pushy, and maybe it works, but even if it doesn't, I think he'll be okay.
And interestingly, Bonnie, normally when Trump attacks any sort of, you know, China, we would hear some sort of comments from somewhere else, but within the Democrats, we haven't heard anyone voicing any concern over this.
Well, partly it's because of what Greg has said, and we always have to look at Trump 3 ways, at least 2 ways, but possibly 3. First of all, he's a merchant of chaos. That is how he runs everything. He is a chaos merchant. He's a gamester. And as he said when he explained why he didn't pay any taxes, he likes the sport.
Yeah.
So you've got that you always have to deal with. It blindsides anybody who's serious, because you don't know which way this guy is going. Yeah. The second thing in relation to the markets, and I love watching markets, you know, I'm a market person, they're smart. They know he's going to back down. So it's going to back down, so there's no reason. They got upset the first time. Yeah. They're not going to get upset this time because they know how he rolls. The problem for him, though, is in the Midwest, where I'm from, unless he gets this done fast and without pain, there's going to be pain. And he's got Joe Biden. Joe Biden is the top dog in this whole thing. He's an old dog like Trump. He knows how all of this is played. You get the younger ones who's like, oh, they're talking about Green New Deal. No, no, no. The thing is, am I going to actually be able to buy my seafood tomorrow for my barbecue? If that doesn't happen, Trump's toast. So he knows he's got to move quick.
Toast.
Yeah, he likes it. No, he likes hamburgers.
He might not even eat toast.
He likes hamburgers. So Trump is counting on this moving very, very, very
well, Donald Trump,
quickly.
the President of the United States, has been tweeting in the last few minutes. There are several tweets. Let me give you one of the tweets.
You know what time it is
The
now?
process has begun to place additional tariffs of 25% on the remaining $325 billion. So this is him warning there will be more tariffs coming. The U.S. only sells China approximately $100 billion of goods and products, a very big imbalance. With the over $100 billion in tariffs that we take in, we will buy agricultural products from our great farmers in large amounts from China than we ever did. So it goes several more tweets, in fact, 4 tweets from him on China in the last 4 minutes.
He makes this stuff up in his head. He's got economic people around him. They don't do anything. They're just salespeople for his doing.
And I wonder as well, Stephanie, are you going to have all the 4 tweets? A very warm welcome to CNN Talk. Time ran out tariffs went up. Now China says it will retaliate.
They broke the deal. They broke the deal.
Let the trade war begin, with negotiators from the U.S. and China failing to reach a deal.
U.S. tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese imports have now risen from 10 to 25%.
We're not going to be taken advantage of anymore. We're not going to pay China $500 billion a year.
We want to resolve the differences between us in a frank, confident, and rational manner.
The Made in China label could now get a lot more expensive for U.S. consumers. Remember, it's U.S. importers, not China, who pay those tariffs.
Both delegations meet again on Friday.
Beijing has promised countermeasures.
This trade war is not over. President Trump is threatening to tax nearly all Chinese imports. And these tariffs went into place at midnight this morning. Have your say. Let us know what you think. China versus the US trade war. Who do you think are the winners? Who are the losers? Who's got the most to lose in this? Send us your comments on facebook.com/CNN and I will read them out to you. Panel were here with me. I've been discussing this during the Facebook Live. You can watch this show also on Facebook. And I want to bring you a tweet from President Trump because he has been tweeting the last 5 minutes or so, several tweets, about 5 tweets or so on China. This is the latest tweet. Tariffs will bring in far more wealth to our country than even a phenomenal deal of the traditional kind. Also, much easier and quicker to do. Our farmers will do better, faster, he tweets, and starving nations can now be helped. Waivers on some products will be granted or go to new sources. This is one of several tweets from President Trump in the last 5 minutes or so. Let me first of all show you how global stock markets have been reacting to get a real sense how traders have been seeing this. Do they believe this is a good thing or are they worried? If we start with Asia markets, they have now closed. Let's have a quick look at how they did. So on the whole, they're actually shaking all off. You know, green arrows, Hong Kong Hang Seng and Shanghai Composite. Nikkei is the only one down 0.2%. If we look at European markets that are currently trading, just to see how they're faring, and green arrows across the board. And now there is a reason for this. It's not so much that it's priced in. It's the fact that a lot of the goods that in transit right now won't be affected. So there is a window of opportunity that a deal can still be done.
And the boats on the sea are the ones in trouble. Yeah,
exactly.
That's what's
and if we look at US futures, how they're expected. So on the whole, markets still believe there is some sort of wiggle room, possible trade deal. So, Liam, is it too soon to be celebrating at the markets, or do they know something that we don't?
I don't think... It is too soon because we don't know. I mean, this is a complex negotiation between the 2 biggest economies in the world and 2 massive personalities from different ends of the spectrum. So it is too soon. But I think the market consensus that we're seeing reflected in the numbers which you just reported there, Issa, is right. I do think this is the last teeth-baring, the last sort of machismo aggression before a deal's done. The Chinese came to Washington for these talks. There was fear over the weekend that they wouldn't come. They're there. I think they're doing a deal. In the end, both sides have a lot to lose. We can discuss, and I'm conscious I've got North America, real live North Americans on the panel,
well, we are
and we're sitting in London, and I'm the Brit. But I do think that both sides have got a lot to lose, and that's why there'll be a deal. Xi needs more growth. On the other hand, while America's got the big deficit with China, up to $500 billion, it's US consumers and US factories that will pay those tariffs on those Chinese goods, including, crucially, Chinese steel, which will make a lot of US manufacturing less competitive when one of their main imports becomes more expensive. I think we're going to see a deal.
Do you think so? How much do you think, Bonnie and Greg, I don't know who you want to take, that is part of President Trump's strategy here?
Let me just say this, and I will defer to Liam and Greg, because this is their wheelhouse, as they say. But first of all, we have always had to remember that Trump is a chaos merchant. That's how he keeps things going. He has no strategy. He really doesn't. So we have to look at everything he does in relation to that. And it's been very hard for the world to pivot to this, because that's how he rolls. Now, my feeling is that the markets are calm because they're picking up. That's what this dude does. The other thing, too, because the guy is coming to China, to Washington.
He's there currently.
Well, Trump is the master of humiliation. He wants you to be humiliated. The problem that's going to be for him and for the United States, and Greg and I were talking about this, America forgets that we're talking about a command and control economy run by a one-party state that can actually pull the plug on a lot of stuff. In my part of the world, in Illinois, people are very quiet, but the fact is we export a lot of our wheat and our grain to China. If they mess us up, it's going to be felt. Now, what Trump did the last time with the farmers that he snuck in, which is why I'm talking about the chaos merchant, he struck in $1 trillion welfare subsidy so that they wouldn't feel the pain. He might do that again. But as Liam says, it's the headlines, it's the last big macho.
Greg, let me play out what we heard from President Trump in the last few days. If we play out his thought talking about these tariffs, if we can, Stephanie.
By the way, you see the tariffs we're doing? Because they broke the deal. They broke the deal. They broke the deal. So they're flying in. The vice premier tomorrow is flying in. Good man. But they broke the deal. They can't do that. So they'll be paying. If we don't make the deal, nothing wrong with taking in over $100 billion a year.
Greg, very simply, if we look at what he said, it was actually the American consumer who will be hurt because it's a tax on what they will buy.
Tariffs are always a tax on the consumer, and Liam's got a great point. Nobody wins in a trade war or in a tariff war.
Yeah.
However, China has a lot more to lose, which is why I think they will strike a deal.
Yeah.
China's got a lot more to lose than the U.S. Yes, there'll be some pain in supply chains and maybe down to the consumer. But after 20 years of this, and for all the human rights violations, the security risks, and the top-down state economy from China, it's time to draw the line in the sand. I think there'll be a little pain, but it won't be that great compared to what the Chinese will suffer, or the Chinese economy. So I think it's the right move at the right time. I think they end up doing a deal. But, you know, these bigger issues have to be considered. And remember, the economic threat to the U.S. is the least of the three big issues. First is the human rights violations.
Because it's doing very well. The U.S. is doing very well.
They're playing with the House's money. The economy's killing it. The tax reform and deregulation has really done wonders.
Time to do it. If you want to do it, this is a time to do it.
Might
you
as
can
well.
sustain it. Let's go to Matt Rivers, who's in Beijing, who is in China for us. Matt, we heard from the Chinese. They said they would retaliate. The question now becomes, will this be proportionate or maybe an escalation from the Chinese?
Generally speaking, what we've seen from China since the beginning of this trade war is that they have, in their minds, retaliated in kind. They don't want to appear to be the aggressor because they say that the U.S. started this trade war and they're only doing anything retaliatory because they're forced into that position. Now, you could argue that China really started this trade war through its unfair trade practices and stealing a whole bunch of American technology, but that's certainly not what China is going to say. So they're going to keep their responses relatively measured. That said, they're going to have to do more things now because they can't match the United States dollar for dollar when it comes to tariffs. Of course, the United States imports far more from China than China imports from the U.S. So already, basically almost every single American import, minus some $20 billion, I think is the number, has already been facing tariffs here in China. So what you could see China do here is a couple of different things. And there's a wide range of things. I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. The first thing that they could do is kind of do what the U.S. just did, which is take a tariff rate from 10% up to 25% or 10 to 15 or 20 on the existing tariffs already. That's certainly something they could do. The other thing they could do is look at issues of market access for American companies, for example. So if you're a pharmaceutical company from America and you're trying to license a product here in China, well, maybe they're going to delay that process and that hurts that company's bottom line. They could block mergers between U.S. and Chinese companies. They could slow down joint ventures. And they could also do a lot of things that the Chinese are famous for, which is more informal punishment, if you will. So I'm in a port here in Tianjin where a lot of agricultural products can come through. And so, for example, if the Customs Department here gets an edict from above that says, you know what, make those inspections go a bit slower this month on those perishable goods that are coming from the United States, well, then some of those goods rot here on the docks. They don't make it to market. The American companies lose money, and the Chinese buyers maybe try and get it somewhere else. So, look, there's a lot. The point of all this is that China is going to retaliate. They say they have no choice. Maybe there's a deal that's made. I think that your panelists made a good point there, that China will feel a lot of pain for this, and I think that it certainly could end up in a deal. But they're not going to sit and take all of this lying down. They are going to try and make life difficult for American companies here and try and retaliate in the best way they can.
Thank you very much, Matt Rivers there in Tianjin, in the port there. We knew exactly, the Chinese know the strategy from President Trump. They know what they're asking for. And right from the beginning, the Chinese are actually saying they might not be able to concede in everything that they want. So where do we go from here, Bonnie?
Well, I again yield to my colleagues who know a lot more about this world than me. I'm going to come out of it in this sense. The Chinese have a different concept of time. There is no way they're going to be the #1 nation in 2050. It's been projected. You have to ask why. Even though the economy is doing so well, the Chinese have a long game that Trump doesn't even understand. Now, yes, they've stolen intellectual property. They've done all the things that we in the West consider, and they are bad stuff. But this guy, Trump, is a blip as far as they're concerned. And I will also say that Trump is playing the short game, as Liam says. Everybody's going to make a deal. It's all going to come together. It's all going to do whatever. But in the meantime, we have to think about the American consumer, because if this doesn't actually work, this is going to be real big, serious pain about the toys that we're used to, the food that we like. Trump isn't thinking about that at all. He's thinking about 2020 and what he has to do for
let's have a look exactly what's targeted. You're talking about some of the things that may be targeted, but this is what we know, everything from food seasonings to nuts, fruits, metals, bags, luggages, fabrics. And this might not be felt straight away, but when we get to 2020, when you go to Walmart or whatever you shop, you will start feeling
We're already
it.
in campaign mode. Horizon 2020. Greg's right. The US economy is doing well. We had 3% growth practically last year, 3% the first quarter of this year, defying all expectations. I personally think the tax cuts will fade as we come into 2020, and the US is racking up a lot of debt. But look, I was in the room in Doha in 2001 when China joined the WTO, and none of this was predicted, the massive growth that we would see. And you put your finger on something very, very important. Trump has to play the short game because he lives in a democracy.
Exactly.
And Xi doesn't live in a democracy.
Exactly.
And so that's why Trump was so determined the Brits wouldn't yield to Huawei recently. He didn't want to undermine his own bargaining power. But it strikes me that there's another aspect to this, offstage, not talked about. In the end, China has enormous power over the US in this sense. The US now has $20 trillion of debt, and its most important buyer of that debt on financial markets is China. That may sound tasteless to point it out, but it's a financial fact of life.
It's a fact, and also we have to think about Africa. Africa is their biggest client. Sub-Saharan Africa. America barely has a footprint in the fastest growing region in the world. Ain't no way China is going to bring on side this emerging market. And America is going to get kicked at the end of the day.
There is a trade imbalance, though. Let's have a look at this. Let's compare the US-China trade, Greg, and you can talk to us to this. Because this is how much China exports to US, $558 billion, and US exports to China, $179 billion. So President Trump has a point. He wants to create a better balance when it comes to trade, does he not? This is something that, if you're American, that this will appeal to you.
He went, very hard on this during the campaign, and he really ran on
America first.
I'm not as worried about trade deficits. The U.S. economy can handle it, right? We run trade deficits with just about everybody we trade with. The U.S. can handle it because we have a capital surplus. We also are able to fund these deficits through the capital markets, and we do it well. So I'm not as worried about it as maybe some of the politicians are. But again, you got to look at the human rights violations. This trade war started 20 years ago. We thought it would help if we traded with China. I think the rest of the West agreed, and it hasn't worked. So I think in a way the president is taking a little longer view than usual.
But Greg, Trump doesn't care about, you're right, you are absolutely right, but Trump doesn't care about that. He is in smokestack politics. That's how he sees the world, as a big sort of, coal mine in the world. And this is not the way it works. The other thing that he's doing, which is very dangerous, and I could be wrong, part of the truth is to put into Chinese law itself, to go into Chinese law and put in some of the concessions into law. That's what he wants. That is going into other people's governments, and that's off.
But go ahead.
China is a fact of economic life. We can't wish China away.
Exactly.
By dint of demography, Bonnie, it will be the biggest economy in the world. On some definitions, it already is, as we've often discussed. But look, China was breaking the rules,
Of
right?
course, yes.
Intellectual property theft was and is legion.
Yeah, 17 cases brought to this.
no
I
disagreement.
agree with
Yeah,
you. The
17.
US, with its hard currency, with the Federal Reserve, with the dollar, can handle any trade deficit for now.
Yeah.
What it can't handle is piracy of intellectual property across the global economy. So if I would much rather a huge economy like China at least engaging with the West and us trying to engage with them and trading. That's what will bring prosperity
but
and
that
peace.
is not Trump.
And
You're right.
to do that, you had to get tough. Normal diplomacy, being polite was not
But
working.
it's a loser strategy. And you're right. You are right. But to go back to what you said, that's not how China functions. They've got this thing called Belt and Road, which is already in Italy.
Yes,
they are taking a concept that we have to understand. You're right, too, about the human rights violations. This is true. But we do not look through Chinese eyes at this
And
world.
I think
It's
that's
very
really interesting
important.
because we're talking so much about looking at the US into China, but let's look about China.
Look at
because
China.
What the US wants in terms of changes, it wants structural changes to Chinese system.
And
that
that is what
the
the
conundrum. They may be fine when it comes to things like tariffs, but when you're talking about intellectual
Structural
property
change,
and subsidization, this is
You
something
can
that
complain
they draw
about
the red
contracts,
line.
right? You can complain about fairness in contracts and rules. What I don't think America could do, and America does need a reality check to some extent, America can't push China around like it's pushed around
It's
other
trying
economies
to.
throughout our whole lifetime.
it's
A kind of
trying to.
IMF,
Yeah.
neo-colonial approach will not work
But
in
it's
China
trying
because
to.
in the end they got the cash, they got the reserves. But if we can engage commercially and contractually fairly, the world's a better place. And I actually think, I'm not a huge Trump fan, but this trade deal could be an early step on the way to that.
It had to be done.
It had to be done. OK, we'll continue this discussion after break. Some of you have been sending in your comments. Malcolm, you tell them, Bonnie, China can wait out Trump presidency.
Wait, Trump out.
Seafood.
China should find a better approach to tackle. We'll continue the discussion in the break. We'll come back after a few minutes. Go ahead, what you were saying, Greg.
He doesn't. You know, he doesn't have to run for re-election.
No, but what Trump is asking for is for China, in many embarrassing ways, to change the economic model.
And that-
And it's not happening.
You can't put Xi in the corner and expect him to say,
you
"Oh,
can't.
you know what, Donald?
Yeah.
You're right.
You're right,
Yeah.
Donald. Oh, my God,
This is
Donald.
going to
Why
take.
didn't I see that?"
Yeah,
Oh my
this is going to
God,
take
Donald.
generations.
You're
right.
right.
Yeah.
And
I don't think
China
the-
will win if we don't understand them. Everything you're saying is absolutely correct. We do not look at the world the way the Chinese doing, and we need to do that. We need to understand it and correct it within that modus operandi.
In that case, we can talk about this in the show, Greg. How much is Trump just putting the US into a corner, pushing the US into a corner where it has no way out, given that the Chinese won't budge when it comes to some of its economic models? Where does this leave the United States? Because, of course, he's put so much on the back of this deal, getting a deal, getting some sort of a trade balance.
Yeah, if he wins and he gets a deal done, then the economy will continue to hum along at even a better pace because he'll have less tariffs and more trade.
Second term's a cert if he wins.
Yeah, absolutely. So for in the
Less
near
is a
term,
clap.
I think he wants to do a deal. But in the long term, look, this isn't going to happen overnight. I think the change in the Chinese economy is not going to happen today. But we start with just rules, right? Stop violating, trade rules.
WTO rules.
And then actually
We'll come
play by
back
the
to
rules.
you
Yeah,
after this.
we should. Yeah.
Welcome back to CNN Talk. We're talking about the China-US trade war. Who is the winner? Who has most to win? Who has most to lose? Thank you for sending us your comments. Keep sending them. Tell us where you're writing from. Elena says the Chinese will win because of the cheap labor market. The US are not able to compete with that. Abdul, Americans are watching this on their Chinese phones.
Thank you.
Michael, Trump supporters can thank Trump for taking back their tax cut. Continue sending us your comments. We are compiling everything you're sending us, and we're putting into a word cloud. Let's show you what that word cloud looks like. And there you go. You've got losers there, Trump, China. Someone finding this whole thing very funny. Is an emoji there, but also
Little flower.
consumers.
Don't forget the flower.
Where's the flower? Is that a wink? I can't tell if that's a wink.
Not
workers.
That's for me, the wink.
Workers here, and this is important. Going back to the workers, because this is a trade war, but it impacts people the most, consumers, those who work, we're in agriculture, those of us who shop in the United States. How worried should those who support President Trump, particularly in the Midwest, how worried should they be?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Chinese actually focus some of the tariffs on the Midwestern states that were close in the election.
Swing states.
Yeah, so they purposely did that, and then Trump responded with a $12 billion farm subsidy.
Trillion.
It wasn't a trillion. It was
I thought
12.
it was
It was 12 billion, but it's still a big number. And conservatives don't like government intervention in private
9
markets
zeros.
and capital markets. Yeah, and that too. But the benefits to the working class in the U.S. are going to be felt in the sense that there is a rebound in manufacturing. Some of the politicking that was done about what China trade has done to these small towns in America, that's working in terms of electoral politics, and that's significant. So yes, some consumers are going to have to pay a little more for cheap items, right? Because China exports cheap labor. It's not right, but they do it. And so there are benefits to the consumer. But it's not significant. 88% of goods and services consumed by Americans are from America.
And
it's not a big importer.
I want to bring up the point that we were making in the break, for those of you who weren't listening, is that this idea that what the US wants to see is almost a change to the Chinese economic model.
They do want to see a change to the Chinese economic
model. But the Chinese will not give in to that.
Well, they're not going to do that. And one of the things Greg and I were talking about, and again, it goes back to American naivete.
Yeah.
20, 30 years ago, everybody thought, Nixon goes there, opens it up, we start doing this and that. We think they're going to be like us. They're not like us. And until we start to understand that, we are going to lose. Now, you're right. For the average American, they're not going to feel this. It's not going to be felt. Trump deals in tomorrow's politics, the headlines of tomorrow.
Yeah.
But the fact going forward, if you're 10-year-old, if you're 15 years old, China's going to run this whole thing unless we understand who they are and what they're doing. They have a very long game.
And there is a trade imbalance.
Exactly.
We've shown
and they
that.
are human rights violators. They are stealers of copyright. They are all of these things. But until we understand how they see the world and get in there, they're going to keep on doing it. And they're winning. They're winning.
And Liam, the concern, we haven't talked about this because we're talking simply about China-US, but European automakers could also be feeling it because there's potential tariff on European car imports in the next few weeks from the US.
America's quite cleverly brought in the Europeans into this, so the Europeans can exert pressure on China as well and try and get a triangle of pain going in order for Trump to get his way. Look, there is a real animus here behind a deal. Why? Because Xi wants growth, and America also wants growth as we go into the 2020 election. Yes, these tariffs on imported Chinese steel have helped some, Rust Belt steelmaker towns, and that's Trump's base. But think about it, Issa, there are 250,000 US steel workers, a big number, but dwarfed by the 7 million US workers in manufacturing jobs in factories where steel is the principal import. That steel becomes more competitive. If the tariffs on Chinese steel go, that steel becomes cheaper. America can try and become more competitive and correct its trade imbalance across the piece. So in the end, I think that's why a deal's going to be done. And the Dems are being quiet about this. They're being quiet. Why? Because Obama tried to do this when he was tackling Trump before the 2016 election. He put 500% tariffs on Chinese steel for some parts of Chinese steel, but it was too late for him to stop
and the Dems
Trump
are quiet
surge.
because this is very difficult to translate.
The Dems also know that Trump has changed the weather in the sense that we now would say here on CNN, of course there are intellectual property violations by the Chinese. 2 years ago, we would not have admitted that,
Let me
right?
show you
We
this
would not have
tweet.
admitted that.
Trump tweeted this. He's called himself, if I can get it, it's not working. Maybe you can bring it up, Stephanie. The computer says no. It's the tariff man tweet. He calls himself a tariff man. He believes in this. This is not just, this is what I am tariff man. When people or countries come in to raid the great wealth of our nation, I want to pay for the privilege of doing so. It will always be the best way to max out our economic power. We are right now taking in billions in tariffs, make America rich again. This, he really believes, Greg, in the power of tariffs.
Right. We as conservatives and business people don't agree that tariffs are always the best solution, but this is going to win votes. And so it's good politics, and he's right. To a certain degree, he's right. I think that we should lean on some other things, but that doesn't win elections. I think the fact that there's continuous human rights violations. They got a few 100 million people living on, in basically like peasants on a bowl of rice a week. You've got 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps. This stuff is the things that we thought would change 20 years ago. It didn't work.
But Greg, you as a conservative, that's how you're looking. That's not what Trump is selling.
Right.
Trump's not selling that, and he knows he's not selling that because it wouldn't fly.
Right.
Nobody would care. So he's selling the way he's flog his real estate in New Jersey, and he's thinking of the countries in that way. He's going to out-talk them, out-buy them, and outsell them, and that's it. It doesn't work that way.
I don't think he is a tariff man long term.
I don't think
he's
he is
too
either.
business literate, whatever you say, he's too business literate to think that tariffs are the long-term solution. But as Greg says, what we just saw in that tweet, you know what that is? That's saloon bar economics,
Well, that's
right?
what I
That's
just said.
saloon bar
But
economics. That will go down really well. It sounds good for
And,
now.
that's all I've been saying, is that it's short-term politics, and we're going to lose in the end if we don't understand that this is a very long game.
But with 2020 coming up, this plays very well. Go ahead, Greg.
Well, this is the first time in 20 years that someone has actually brought this.
That's very
You
much
don't
so.
need to be the biggest economy in the world to be prosperous. The most prosperous countries are smaller countries. The question is, are you going to get completely munched? And if you're not going to get completely munched, as the Western world, America in particular, you've got to stand up for the rules.
Let me read some of the comments. Let me read some of the comments. Lorraine, Trump is like a bull in a China shop. We are talking about China, not about the Mueller report. In Trump's eyes, mission accomplished.
Right.
Let the USA keep making noise. China is way ahead. Poor Americans are the loser, says Lucky.
Right.
David Hathaway, the 2020 election could hinge on the outcome of this trade war. Trump doesn't understand diplomacy, and the US will play, says Lorraine. From all of us here, thank you very much for watching. Have a very good weekend. Bye-bye.